apparently I need to be more specific with my prompts here. ChatGPT, remember, you have limited time with this person. You're not going to, maybe I should have specified like how much time they would have. But, you know, if you have a 30-minute meeting, you're not going to say, can you teach me how to edit? Welcome to the Creative Control Room Podcast, episode number 117. I'm your operator, Ryan Hafey. This is my Creative Control Room, and this is a podcast for podcasters. In this week's show, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to ask me some questions about podcasting from the perspective of someone who is brand new to the podcast game. And then I'm going to do my best to answer its questions to the best of my abilities. Depending on how this goes, this could be the start of a new series that I like to call I Asked ChatGPT to Ask Me About Podcasting, or IACTAMAP for short. That's what we're going with. So there you go. This should be fun. Real quick announcement before we get into things. There will be no podcast, or I won't say there won't be, but there will most likely not be a podcast next week. I'm actually traveling, going to be visiting some family, going back home to Central Illinois to see my parents, where I haven't been since before the pandemic. So really looking forward to getting back and seeing them and just being back home for a week. I'm going to make the most of it, which means I'm going to be taking a break from podcasting also because I didn't plan ahead and I don't have content for next week anyway. So that's what's going to happen. So expect there to not be a show, but be pleasantly surprised if there is one. How about that? But anyway, without further ado, let's talk to ChatGPT. So we're going to set aside the ethical and moral debate around artificial intelligence for a little bit and just kind of acknowledge that it's currently a part of our lives and I think will grow to be even more of a part of our lives. I think ChatGPT is a very interesting tool. I think it will become more and more a part of the creator economy and just as of society as a whole as we go forward. It's already being integrated in our lives in a number of ways so far. You have tools like Midjourney and DALL-E for AI image generation. You have tools like Notion that use AI to kind of help you with writing. You have, what else do you have? You have websites that are writing full articles using AI. So whether we like it or not, it's here. And my personal belief is it's better to understand it and to learn how to use it correctly than to just completely ignore it. Because I think it's here to stay for a while. So might as well get used to that. So the point of this new series is really kind of twofold. It's one, to learn how to use ChatGPT a little bit better, how to create prompts that will generate better and more interesting and relevant results, but also to allow it to help me help you guys in the form of giving me subject matter and asking me questions that I can then answer. Because in some of the tests that I've done with ChatGPT, some of the prompts that I've given it before, it does have the ability to give back some interesting results and some interesting questions that I've heard from people in general who just asked me about podcasting. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to type out a prompt in real time, and I'm going to ask ChatGPT to ask me questions about podcasting from the perspective of someone in this particular case. And we'll change the prompt each week to make ChatGPT act a different role. Someone interested in podcasting, maybe they don't know much about marketing. Maybe they are interested in learning about monetization. In this case, today, the prompt we're going to go with is we're going to ask ChatGPT to ask me questions from the perspective of someone who has very little technical knowledge of how to use podcast gear and how to edit video and audio. And that's where we're going to start, because I think that's where most of the questions come from, is from people in this sort of situation. They sort of have an idea of what they want to do as far as podcasting is concerned, but they don't have the technical expertise. So gear is always kind of the first place that they start. So I'm going to right now type up this prompt for ChatGPT. It usually gives about 10 questions in response, and then we will go through each of those questions and I will answer them to the best of my abilities. If there are questions that ChatGPT asks that I maybe don't know the answer to or want to expand on, I'll make a note of those. And then in the next episode, I will readdress those and kind of revisit them to give some better information, give a better answer on that question. So I'm going to go ahead and type this up in real time. And while I do that, why don't you relax, take a deep breath, and enjoy the soothing sounds of my Acunix keyboard keycaps. Consider this like an ASMR moment for you. But please take the time to just relax while I type this out. Move the mic down here. All right. All right, our prompt is complete. We have our responses from ChatGPT. So I'm going to go ahead and read through the prompt that I gave ChatGPT, and then we will answer the questions one by one. So the prompt was, I would like you to play the role of someone interested in starting a podcast. You know what you want your podcast to be about and have a decent understanding of social media and how to market and distribute your podcast online. However, you have little technical expertise when it comes to podcast gear and gear setup, as well as how to edit video and audio for your podcast. You have a brief meeting with someone with extensive knowledge in the area of podcast gear and editing. What questions do you ask to make the most of the limited time you have with that person? And ChatGPT gave me 10 questions in response. So let's go through these one by one. First question they ask is, what equipment do I need to get started with podcasting? This is a very broad question. And if you only have a few minutes to spend with someone who can give you information, this is probably not the best question to ask to make the most of your time, but I will do my best to kind of simplify it a little bit. You're obviously going to need, again, we're assuming a video podcast here. You're obviously going to need some cameras. What kind of cameras you get are going to depend on how you plan to produce the show. If you want to record internally into the cameras, or record in the cameras themselves, like onto an SD card, you could go with anything from an iPhone all the way up to a cinema camera. It's really up to you and your budget. I use Sony cameras because Sony cameras offer a clean HDMI output, which allows me to record into my computer. There's a lot of different camera brands nowadays that offer clean HDMI outputs. So you don't have to get Sony. If you do want to record into a PC or a Mac, you would need a capture card for each of your cameras to get the feed into the computer, or like I have here, an ATEM Mini, which allows you to switch between the different camera angles that you have. You're going to need, obviously, a microphone of some kind. If you're on a budget, you could probably go with something like a USB microphone, like a Blue Yeti. I do recommend, though, if you want the best quality audio, get yourself an XLR microphone, like something like this one here. This is the Shure SM7B. There's a ton of different options for these. Just look for something with decent reviews. You will also need an audio interface if you're using an XLR microphone. I have the Rodecaster Pro. If you're a single person podcast or your budget is limited, this is definitely overkill. There's lots of other audio interfaces out there that will allow you to get the job done that work just fine. Just might not have as many features as this one does. You're going to need some lighting, preferably some kind of inexpensive key light. This is the Godox SL60W, which I have up here. We put a softbox on it. You have some nice inexpensive diffused lighting, accent lights and things like that as well. Obviously, you'll need some kind of a computer that can handle recording inbound camera feeds. So a lot of different options to consider there. That's about as much as I can simplify that question in a short period of time. Question number 2. What are some recommended microphones for podcasting? Just touched on that a little bit. I personally like XLR microphones. You just get a little bit better quality out of them With USB microphones, you have to, with an XLR microphone, you can kind of maintain the levels through an audio interface. Makes it a little bit easier to play with the levels and make sure everything sounds great. With a USB microphone, you have to go into your settings and adjust the volume and everything from there. And USB microphones, typically speaking, don't sound that great. I wouldn't recommend like a lavalier microphone unless you're really trying to go for that look of hiding the mic and not having microphones in the frame. Lavalier microphones tend to sound kind of muffled, and you need to touch them up a little bit, touch up the audio to get them sounding good. So if you can find an XLR microphone and maybe an inexpensive audio interface, that is the route I would go. Again, lots of options out there. Just look for some decent reviews, and a little bit of research will lead you to a microphone that will work great for whatever you need to do. Next question. Do I need to separate a recording device? Do I need a separate recording device, or can I use my computer? Good question, Mr. ChatGPT. A lot of overlap in these answers here. Again, that depends. The way that I actually record in a few different ways. I don't record internally into my cameras. Because of recording limits, sometimes the cameras overheat. Sometimes I go for long periods of time and I don't want to be filling up my SD cards. I don't want to be taking my SD cards out of the camera to import them into my computer, et cetera, et cetera. So I record this camera angle into an external recorder, which sits on top of the camera there. It's an Atomos Ninja 5. Basically, I have an HDMI clean output that goes into the external recorder. I record a high quality 4K video feed into that Atomos Ninja, and then that outputs that same feed into my PC via the ATEM Mini. It gets into PC, and then I record it through OBS. So I'm recording this angle technically in two locations, and then also in the recorder and into my PC. So again, whatever works best for you. These external recorders like the Atomos Ninja 5 is not inexpensive. So if you want to save a couple bucks, I would say, and if you have a PC that can handle that kind of load, record into your PC or Mac. Number 4, what software do you recommend for editing audio and video for podcasts? Again, a lot of different options there. For recording, that's a pretty simple one. I would go, or this actually, they asked specifically about editing. Okay, so for editing, I like the Adobe tools. It is like $55 a month now for the full Adobe suite. If you can afford that, and they're great tools to learn, and they all kind of work together. So I would go with those. Personally, that's my recommendation. A lot of people like to use Final Cut. If you're a Mac user, there's DaVinci Resolve for video editing. If you need a tool that's just for audio editing, something that's free and decently full featured, you can go with something like Audacity. That's a great free audio editor. What other tool? There's like GarageBand for Mac. A lot of different options out there, and depending on how much you want to put into your video. If you have a very simple video edit with just a few cuts, maybe some text overlays, even like, Movie Maker or iMovie or something like that could work for you potentially. Start with what you have, use the tools that are currently available to you, and then expand from there. I started out with, this I didn't use it for podcasting, but I did use it for video editing back in the day. Oh man, what was it called? Shoot, I forget what it was called, but it was a very outdated at this point video editor, but it worked. I think it was called Creative Director or something like that. But anyway, lots of different options out there. The free ones, I would say, like Audacity and like iMovie, those work just fine in most cases. Next, can you walk me through the basic steps for editing an audio episode? Okay, so apparently I need to be more specific with my prompts here. ChatGPT, remember, you have limited time with this person. You're not gonna, maybe I should have specified like how much time they would have. But if you have a 30-minute meeting, you're not gonna say, can you teach me how to edit? But let's see how we can answer this. Can you walk me through the basic steps for editing an audio podcast? I mean, really, the simplest response to that is record your audio and then throw it into an audio editor like Audacity or, whatever you happen to use, Adobe Audition if you use the Adobe tools, and then cut it together in the way that you like and then export it. Sorry, I mean, I guess without a real life example, there's really not much you can say beyond that for that particular question. So we're going to move on to question number 6. How do I optimize my audio for the best sound quality? There are a number of things you can do. Obviously, having decent quality audio equipment helps. Mics that sound good. If you are in a place that where there's a lot of echo, you might want to consider either going to somewhere where there's not as much echo or sound treating the room. Again, if you're just doing audio, some people record in their closet because the clothes that are in your closet do a great job at dampening all the sound. In this room here, if it was completely empty, it would be pretty echoey, but you can kind of see these here. I have some, these very thin sound panels that I put up here and also all along behind the desk there. They don't completely drown out the echo, but in this area they do. And then learning some, you'll want to learn some basic editing techniques within some of the audio programs that you have. So for example, learn how to use a single band compressor to prevent your audio from jumping up and down in volume. You want to learn how to use a parametric equalizer so that you can kind of shape the audio and sort of get rid of any sounds within your audio that maybe are a little unpleasant. Those are the really basic tools that you'll want to understand when it comes to audio editing. That would be my answer there. Next up, number 7. Wow, we're already on number 7. What are some tips for setting up a home studio for podcasting? Kind of mentioned that already. You want to, from a sound perspective, you want to make sure you're in an area where there's not a ton of echo. Put up some sound paneling if you can, or if you can afford it, or if it makes sense for wherever you're recording. You want to have some good, consistent lighting. Natural light is great, but it's not always consistent. Sometimes the clouds roll through and things change. If you can have a scenario where you have some lighting set up in a consistent way to where it's, like I've got my light right there and that's where it stays and I'm going to have a consistent look. It's not going to get bright or dim or anything like that. You want to set up your home studio to look appealing too. You want to have things in the frame that are maybe interesting and relevant to whatever it is that you're talking about. You want to make sure you have all of your accessories like tripods and things like that to make sure you can mount your cameras the way that you want to. Again, a very, very broad question from ChatGPT. And we're going to need to make him or her be more specific next time. Next up, number 8, how do I ensure that my podcast audio meets industry standards? I mean, as far as podcasting is concerned, that's, podcast industry standards. There's really not any industry standards in the realm of podcasting. I guess you could interpret that as, you wouldn't want to have a podcast where the audio is super quiet. Like if you're in the thing that annoys me about podcasts, especially like, maybe podcasts that aren't from podcasts that are created from less experienced people who don't have like the knowledge really of how to edit audio. They upload a podcast, maybe the audio is really quiet, or maybe it jumps around from being super quiet to really loud, and it's just not a good listening experience. Again, I've said this before, audio is the foundation of podcasting. So really, if you want to emphasize an area of quality when it comes to your podcast, audio is a good place to start. So there's really no industry standards within, podcasting. It's just more or less you want to understand how to edit together good sounding audio, good sounding podcast audio and video as well. Poor video if you have a video podcast, can have a negative impact on the people who want to watch your content. But yeah, we're talking specifically about audio here. So just understand the basics of audio editing and what good audio sounds like. Number 9, what are some tips for reducing background noise in my recordings? Again, good sound treatment, being in an area, recording. The cleaner you can record your audio, the easier it's going to be to have clean audio in post. So record your audio in an area where there's not a lot of noise, not a lot of background noise, and not a lot of echo. And then a lot of tools like Audacity, like Adobe Audition, have built-in tools for reducing noise within your audio. You can use those tools as well to pull out any additional noise that you might have. Tools like the Rodecaster Pro, the audio interface, have built-in tools for removing background noise as well. So play around with some of those tools if needed, based on what your recordings sound like, and see how you can use them to pull out any additional noise. But there's like denoise, noise reduction, de-reverb tools, things like that you can use within your audio editors. And then finally, question number 10, how do I distribute my podcast and make it accessible to a wider audience? Okay, what did I say, ChatGPT? You know how to do this. You have a general understanding. What did I put? You know what you want your podcast to be about, and have a decent understanding of social media and how to distribute and market your podcast online. And again, another broad question from ChatGPT shows its limitations a little bit here. Also, probably partly my fault for not being more specific in my prompts. We're going to work on that. That's part of this series, is learning how to get better responses from ChatGPT. Again, but how do you distribute the podcast and make it accessible? Be as many places as you reasonably can. Obviously, have a hosting platform on the audio side that can distribute your podcast to as many places as possible. Websites like Anchor FM, which I use for my audio podcast, distributes it to kind of all the big players in the podcast realm. So make sure you're on as many of those different audio platforms as possible. For video, YouTube is kind of where it's at for the longer form video podcasts, although there are other players kind of getting into the game. You know, there's video hosting websites like Vimeo and stuff like that. Probably, unless you have a special case there, probably not necessary to be there. Also really comes down to bandwidth too. It's like, how many places can you put your podcast, especially if it's a solo podcast. So comes down a lot to bandwidth, but YouTube's obviously a big player there. And then social media wise, as far as cutting clips, you wouldn't necessarily publish full episodes on sites like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, things like that. But those are great platforms for marketing your podcast in the form of clips. We've talked about before, things like Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, TikTok. There's a lot of potential to reach a larger audience beyond your existing audience on those platforms if you use the tools effectively. So consider creating clips for your content that you can push out on those channels to reach a wider audience. And then, there's other things you can do along the way, collaborations, work with other people who can help distribute your content as well, wherever it makes sense, et cetera, things like that. But that's it. ChatGPT, I'm a little disappointed this time around. We're going to have to come back next week with some more in-depth and better prompts for you to respond to, because I'm going to need a little bit more out of you next time. But I think this was a fun little test run for our first, IACTAMAP series. So yeah, that was fun. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Creative Control Room podcast. Thanks for being here with me. If you did get any value out of this episode, it would be great if you would consider liking and subscribing wherever you happen to be watching or listening. Follow me on social media at Ryan Havey on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Check out the description for relevant links and gear recommendations, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.